Hey everyone, Shin here. So I realized that I haven't done a video on any of the builds I use in PvP. Most of the time I haven't bothered with it because I change builds a fair amount and I haven't done anything that hasn't been done before. But I figured I would share with you guys my Rata build since I like to use it a lot on the stream and people have asked about it and whatnot. So this is what this video is going to be about. It's going to be about the Rata build that I came up with a while back. This isn't a new build. This is actually my personal take on a former meta build Warriors had. I have a lot of fun with it. I still use it. It's effective enough. It's not quite top tier meta, but it's still fun to use. So here you guys go. Since this is a PvP build, there aren't quite as many things to go over as opposed to a World War World build. It's just the stuff that's in the build UI and the traits. For the weapons the build uses, this is a longbow axe sword build. For the utilities, it uses Healing Signet, Triple Stance, that is Balance Stance, Endure Pain, and Berserker Stance. The elite can either be Signet of Rage if you're alone, or it can be War Banner if you decide to team fight a lot with it. The sigils in the longbow are Battle and Hydromancy. The sigils in the axe and sword are Doom and Intelligence. The rune is the Rune of Redasum, hence where the name of the build comes from. And the amulet is Celestial Amulet. For the traits of the build, it runs a 40604 spread. The strength traits are Great Fortitude and Axe Mastery. If you want, you can swap out Great Fortitude for dual wielding. It depends on whether you want to be more offensive or defensive. The defense traits are Sure-Footed, Cleansing Ire, and Missile Deflection. And the discipline traits are Vigorous Focus and Destruction of the Empowered. If you want, you can switch Destruction of the Empowered out for Warrior Sprint or Mobile Strikes. It's up to you. Alright, now that the setup of the build is taken care of, I can go over kind of the idea behind the build, what I like to use it for, where it's strong, what some of the drawbacks of it are, things like that. Now, as far as where the build really shines, this is a very good point fighting build. This is a build that you want to be using on top of a conquest point, preferably in the middle or as close to the center of a point as possible. The Red Assume rune, when you are hit, there's a 50% chance that you'll spawn a radiation field on a 90-second cooldown. This radiation field will tick for 10 seconds, and every second it will put out a set of weakness and poison on anyone standing in that field. And the field itself is fairly large. It's about 2/3 the size of a conquest point. This field is very good for turning the tides of fights because your opponent's going to be both poisoned and weakened, meaning they're not going to be taking as much healing, they won't be able to dodge as much, and they're going to be dealing less damage to you and your teammates. Now, the Radasum proc isn't the only thing that makes the build good for fighting on a point. This build has all the benefits of the longbow, including Convulsive Shot and Arcing Arrow for area denial, condition management, and might stacking. It has a blind, it has Pin Down for Immobilize and Bleeds, it has Fan of Fire for more burning. Over on the Axe and Sword, you have respectable burst damage, you have Torment access, you have a block that will not only prevent ranged attacks from hitting you, but it will also counter any melee attacks with a set of bleed, and it will reflect projectiles from, say, a ranger or an engineer or anyone who decides to throw them at you, which throws all of those effects that would be on those projectiles back at the target. You also have Eviscerate for a large chunk of damage and a fire shield when you're standing in your fire fields. And you have your 3 stances for extra sustain and dodging capability because you're going to be getting vigor every time you use a stance, in addition to all of the benefits that each stance provides. It's all of these things put together that make me really enjoy this build because there are a lot of moving parts, there are a lot of tools you have at your disposal to shut down opponents or out-sustain them when they're trying to take a point from you or you're trying to take a point from them. I like using this build for assaulting the far point at the start of a match for most maps, and it tends to work very well against most home point defenders. Now, as much fun as I have with this build, and as powerful as it is on point, there are a few weaknesses inherent to the build. One of the biggest inherent flaws with the build is in relation to the Red Assume proc, in that it has a long internal cooldown, and it is effectively worthless if you're not on a point, because your opponent is not forced to stand in it. This means that if you get shot or you get hit when you are approaching a point or you are in between points and that proc goes off, you've effectively lost a very large chunk of your point fighting potential or one of your major tools for fighting an opponent on a point. Another major weakness of the build is its low mobility. Because it's using longbow and axe for its main hand weapons, you're not going to be able to move around as much as, say, you would be able to with a sword or a greatsword or even a hammer. This means that the build has to commit to fights, or it has to stay in one place for a lot longer than another warrior build might have to. Alright, now in regards to these strengths and weaknesses, I can give you guys a few tips on how best to mitigate the weaknesses and enhance the strengths as far as positioning and what points you should go to in a match. For every map except for Forest of Niflhel and Temple of the Silent Storm, I prefer to go to the opponent's far point because I don't run the risk of being seen or engaged by any crossers from the other team who may be going to the home point, simply because these maps don't have crossing paths like that. Forest of Niflhel, the beach acts as a crossing point between the two farpoint assaulters on each team, meaning that they can very easily hit each other, and in this case, it would have a very good chance of proccing your rune set. Temple of Silent Storm, the area near the stillness buff, is the same way. A good way to think about the rune set is you are carrying precious cargo, and if you're hit, that cargo is going to shatter. So you want to avoid any engagements you can at the start of a match with an opponent, so you can bring that proc to the point, and then as soon as you engage with someone, it will drop on the point and give you that advantage. Now, when you're on approach to a point, if you see an opponent coming who has a very good range on you, such as a ranger or a necromancer, you want to make sure you have your riposte from your offhand sword ready, just in case those projectiles are going to hit you, because you, again, don't want that proc to go off before you get on the point. You want to make sure you are in the conquest point before you start taking damage, before you start taking hits. Riposte is very good because of the projectile reflect, because it means you will be able to throw any projectiles thrown at you from, say, that ranger or that engineer or whatever, back at them, preventing the proc from going off, and throwing whatever damage and effects back to them. If you know your opponent is going to throw down AoEs, such as a Necromancer's Marks or things like that, you can always dodge roll or otherwise use various tools to get onto the point before the damage will hit you and proc that rune set. Once you've actually gotten onto the point, you want to make sure you are in or as close to the center of that point as possible, so then your Rata proc will cover as much of that point as possible. From there, you're going to want to start using your Fire Field from Combustive Shot to stack Might with Arcing Arrow. You're going to want to dance around in it to force your opponent to either stay out of it or take the damage from it. You're going to want to use Riposte to, again, throw any projectiles your opponent may throw at you. It's very nice for fighting a Pistol Engineer, because they're going to have both a blind and poison that you can throw right back at them if they decide to shoot you with it. You're also going to want to make sure that you are throwing your Thrown Axe and your Impales through your Fire Field to get burning and the effects of those two skills on your opponent, because they are projectile finishers. Same goes for any arrow on the Longbow. Those are, majority of them, projectile finishers, especially Pin Down. You want to make sure you can line up your big hits through that Fire Field to get that extra burning proc on your opponent. Now, if you're using a variant that has Signet of Rage as your elite, the extra adrenaline you're gaining from having that on passive is going to allow you to gain enough adrenaline to throw some eviscerates in between your Combustive Shot uses, meaning not only will you be able to do a good chunk of burst damage to your opponent, but you'll also be able to get a Fire Shield if you use it through your Combustive Fields. You can have a Fire Field that lasts for as long as you need it to also do an Eviscerate, giving you a Fire Shield which will burn opponents that attack you and give you more might. Most of these tactics rely on you being able to have a 3-bar Combustive Shot ready as often as possible and dropping it as often as possible, because if you do not have that field at 3 bars when you launch it, it won't last for long enough and it won't cover as much of the point as you need it to for the zoning potential and the damage and the effects. Alright guys, that's it for the Rata build. I hope you enjoyed the video, and I hope you enjoyed the build if you decided to try it out. I have a lot of fun with it. It's something I like to use when I'm not practicing with my team and just queuing with viewers or solo queuing or whatever. There's a lot of neat tricks you can pull off against opponents with it. Feel free to toss a like, comment, whatever if you enjoyed the video, and I will see you around the stream or in the next video. Take care, everyone.